So
Cool.
paper kite.
So paper kite is, as you said, this is the mother block of the Tin Soldier vineyard. So
Yeah.
cuttings of Semillon Gris were taken to make the Tin Soldier vineyard.
Yeah.
So how much of this vineyard is Semillon Gris in a approximate sort of?
So probably 5 to 70%, but this is one of the old clonal materials, Semillon vineyards. So a whole lot of the Semillon Blanc mutated to Gris. So what you find in these plantings is it's mostly Semillon Blanc, but just dotted around through the block, there are a few Semillon Gris vines. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of characteristic of these old vineyards, of which there are very, very few now. Mm-hmm. But this wine, just a little bit on the history of this wine. So in the end of 2014, I'd heard about, and I tasted Basil Landau's Semillon a few times and heard about the vineyard. And I think I was just young and stupid enough to just go and knock on his door and, you know, and I think I was artless enough. I tried to be very circumspect, and he was like, "Oh, you want to buy Semillon?" And I think he was just feeling very generous, so he agreed to sell me some Semillon in the 2015 vintage. So the first vintage of Paper Kite was from the oldest Semillon vineyard in the country. And again, like this vineyard, old bush vines. It was planted in 1903. Same thing, quite a lot of Semillon Blanc. Lots of Semillon Gris sort of interplanted. And then at some point, sort of 20 years down the track, some vines died and they replanted with Claret.
Yeah, right.
So it's this real sort of mengelmoos of old vines. And I mean, 15 was a fantastic white wine vintage, you know, with that vineyard, it absolutely sang. But I only had access that 1 year. So I approached Franziska Schreiber, who owns this vineyard, and I said, look, you know, I really want to work with old vine Semillon. At the time, that vineyard, she was selling it to someone, it was just disappearing into a blend somewhere. Mm-hmm. So she said, yeah, let's go for it. And, you know, we worked extremely well together. She's incredibly dedicated.
She's a bit of a machine, isn't she?
Yeah.
Powerhouse.
So, you know, the vineyard's not as epically old. It was planted in 63, but it's still, you know, it's still decently old. And it's very well looked after. Yeah, this is on the Paardeberg. So again, like with all our winemaking, it's very simple, whole bunch pressed in an old basket pressed, no sulfur dioxide or anything like that. And then almost all our wines go into old oak. But over the last few years, I've been buying 2 500-liter Austrian oak barrels each year, mm-hmm. just to have some fresher oak coming down the line.
Yes.
Without shocking the whole system with a whole lot of new oak. Yes. Not that I can afford that, but you know, then the question was, where do we put the oak? So this sees 3 months in the 500-liter stockinges, mm-hmm. at which time I do a racking and I put some Chardonnay in to the new stockinges. So okay. It's really just,
and is that,
we walk it past some new oak barrels for a couple of months.
Yeah, right. So is that to give the Chardonnay a little bit of extra structure as well as not give the Semillon too much?
Too much, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think you'll see this, and what I like about the Stockinger oak, it's not very aromatic, it's much more structural, they're blonde toasted, so we're looking for a little bit of oak tannin without too much richness, because I think the Semillon, even for a 22, for a young wine, is quite rich already, and we'll see as this develops, it's going to get very oily and rich, and I think it's easy to overshoot the mark on new oak. But that said, look, I mean, Buchenholzkloof, the Franschhoek Semillon, I love that wine. It's very classic style. There's a lot of oak. It becomes so opulent, but it's a wonderful wine.
It gets toasty and nutty, but not overtly oxidative. It's really lovely.
Yeah. And it's a very specific style. But I think, with Semillon, there's a temptation to push it too much in the beginning. You know, so I think we just try rein it in the beginning. You know, keep it together, and I think that small amount of new oak has just added a little bit of polish to the wine. That's very positive.
Cool. And there's an intensity here that is not present. I mean, maybe this is less complex. So maybe say much more intense and much more precise than the Tin Soldier. And you think that's primarily because of the age of the vineyard?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, Semillon when it's young, it's very productive, produces big bunches, big berries. And I think there's years where this vineyard almost looks like Chenin in terms of berry size. Very small berries, much smaller bunches. So, I think you've got that natural attenuation of its ability to produce. And that's definitely where you're getting the concentration here.
Yeah, so it's a lovely concentration. So
yeah, it's very subdued, but it's a lot of back end.
As well, and,
yeah.
But very savoury again. It seems like quite a savoury vintage, like a nice salt line running through all the wines.
Yeah.
Almost like nori sheets, that kind of. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, very lovely.
What's the highest stuff you do?
500s, yeah.
So it's quite thick staves, isn't it? So
so
less,
it's very
less
oxidative.
oxidative.
Yeah. Very tight grained. It's Austrian, mixed. Yeah, but it's very, very tight grained. Now we were talking to a couple of the Overberg winemakers, and they say, but they're so bloody expensive, and they don't give you a lot of impact. Which is what I like about them. But I can understand it where if you have a program where you really wanted or needed to see oak, there's a lot of cooperages that are going to give you more aromatics and more impact.
Yeah.
But what I like about these, it's very long. You get something out of these barrels for a good few years. They're extremely well. And our idea is to age these barrels into the system for 15 years. So keep it together.
Genius. There's also a creamy opulence to this wine. And is that part of that new oak? Do you think, that given that little bit of
and that's and the lees contact and all this, and that's something that'll develop. As this wine ages, that richness will really
move forward in the palate?
come
Yeah.
out.
Okay. Awesome.